Welcome. My name is Peter Trappa, and I'm Dean of the College of Science here at the University of Utah. And I want to welcome all of you to this installment of our Frontiers of Science lecture series. As many of you know, the Frontiers series is the longest continuously running lecture series at the University of Utah. It was started over 50 years ago by Pete Gibbs, who was then chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy. At that time, Dr. Gibbs had the visionary idea of bringing together world-class researchers in a public forum for a general audience. And that's a concept that's much more familiar to us now, but in those days it was quite forward-looking. And in the intervening years, the series has seen a great number of very distinguished lectures, including 23 by Nobelists. This year, because of the challenges posed by the pandemic, we've focused the lecture series on our own researchers here at the University of Utah. And today, I'm very happy to say that we have Professor Anil Seth from the Department of Physics and Astronomy, who's going to be telling us about the search for intermediate-sized black holes. I want to give Dr. Seth a proper introduction, but before I do that, I want to remind all of you of the rough format of today's webinar. So after the introductions, we're going to queue up a short video, which will introduce you to Professor Seth and his research. And at the conclusion of that video, I'm then going to turn it over to Professor Seth, who's going to give us a slide presentation, about 15 or 20 minutes. And that will leave us enough time for what I know will be a very robust Q&A period, which I will moderate. Many of you have submitted your questions in advance, but you'll also have the opportunity to submit your questions in real time using the chat function. All right, so without further ado, let me give you a better introduction of Professor Seth. He's currently associate professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, where he serves as director of undergraduate studies for that large and important department. He grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he did his PhD at the University of Washington, and then took a postdoctoral position at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. After that postdoctoral appointment, he came to the U over 10 years ago now. And in the years that he's been here, he's won some of the most prestigious internal awards that we offer at the university, including the Early Career Teaching Award for his exceptional teaching, and the Presidential Scholar Award for his research primarily. He's been funded by a wide variety of agencies. I'll just mention one of his grants, an NSF Career Award for his work on understanding galaxy nuclei. That's an award that intertwines both his research and educational expertise, and we'll hear more about that, I think, in the course of this talk. He's very committed to mentoring both undergraduate and graduate students, and together he's mentored over 17 undergraduate students and 6 graduate students in his decade or so here at the U. He's very active in astronomy and dark sky outreach efforts, both at the university and around the state, some of our national parks, and I think we'll hear more about that too as the talk progresses. So without further ado, let's cue up the video and learn more about Professor Seth and his research on black holes.
I think astronomy is important because it kind of answers the most fundamental questions that we have about the universe. When we're wondering about where we came from and who we are, astronomy is really one of the fundamental pieces of that. All of the elements the Earth is made out of, they were all made in stars. And so I think a fundamental piece of our human knowledge is really based on astronomy. Yeah, when you have star parties, I find that kids, they don't really like looking through the telescope, but what they really like is moving the dome. If they give them the chance to hit the green button and make the dome move, they're super happy. Looking up at the sky wasn't what got me into astronomy, even though that's one of the things that I really enjoy today. I was more excited about the kind of ideas of how we could learn so much about our universe and where we came from. Recently, over the last decade or so, I've really been focusing on black holes as my main topic of research. And black holes are really, amazing objects. They're the most superlative objects in the universe. So there's lots of weird things that happen around black holes. Time slows down. If you were falling into a black hole, you would get stretched out into a little piece of spaghetti. All kinds of crazy stuff happens. The bigger black holes that we find at the centers of galaxies, those are the things that I work on. And those we really don't know about. We know they're there because we can actually see stars moving around them, but we don't have any idea where they came from in our universe. And so that's what I've been working on, is trying to understand what the origin of those supermassive black holes that we see at the centers of galaxies are. A lot of my work is done with a telescope on Hawaii, the Gemini telescope on Mauna Kea. There was, back in 2014, I downloaded some data that they gotten the night before at the telescope. I kind of went through it all in a few hours, and I made a map of the motions of stars within that object. And immediately I could see that the stars at the center were moving around way faster than I expected. And that is the signature of a massive black hole. It was the first object that we found with a supermassive black hole that wasn't at the center of a galaxy. And it had a black hole that was 5 times the black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. I knew right away that it was something really exciting. A lot of what I like about astronomy is that it's a lot like archaeology, but we're trying to find out the secrets of the universe. You get these just little tiny clues. You find out about the metal abundance of some metal in some star, and then you use that to figure out, oh, maybe that is telling us something about what supernova created it, or something like that. And from that you can learn really fundamental things, about how our universe came to be. In addition to this telescope, we have a telescope down in southern Utah. It's up on Frisco Peak. That telescope is in a fantastically dark spot. So we go down there because it's dark, and also because as you get to higher elevation, the turbulence of the atmosphere is less. And that makes it so that the stars don't twinkle as much. Twinkle, twinkle, little star is definitely not my favorite song. Taking students down there is one of my favorite things. We use it for teaching. And so it's a really kind of a capstone experience for our students in our observational astronomy course to go down there. Astronomy is a great field for getting undergraduates involved in research. For instance, the Andromeda galaxy and the Triangulum galaxy, which are nearby galaxies, the kind of closest big galaxies to us in the universe. So I've been part of these big Hubble Space Telescope projects, which have taken these incredibly detailed images where we can see 100 million stars in Andromeda. And I have students working on parts of those projects.
I was an undergrad student in a university in Chile. My professors had collaborations with a professor here, and they recommended me this institution to continue my studies. My first project was based on that summer research internship that I did with him, which was studying the infrared emission from supermassive black holes in low luminosity galaxies. I've definitely enjoyed my time doing research with him. It has been a very positive experience.
One of the things I'm really excited about is the James Webb Space Telescope, which is launching later this year. It has a mirror that's 10 times the size of the Hubble mirror. And that means that we're going to be able to see really, really faint objects right to the very distant edges of the universe and nearby the very faintest planets and stars. Being an astronomer makes you think about the world in different ways, right? It both kind of opens your mind to how vast it is, but for me, it's also really made me appreciate how precious our Earth is. Our sun is so far away from all the other suns in the universe that we're not going to go to another planet. We're not going to settle anywhere else. And we really need to take care of this one.
Thanks for that inspiring overview. And now Professor Seth is going to share a screen and move into the slide talk phase of this lecture series.
Is this all good? I will hit play here. All right. Well, thanks for the introduction, Peter, and thank you all for coming today. It's a rare day at the office for me. I'm going to be telling you over the next about 15 minutes about a question that I'm really excited about right now, kind of and going forward in the future, which is this ongoing hunt for intermediate mass black holes, trying to find out whether intermediate mass black holes exist. And I'll tell you what those are and why they're interesting, and then talk a little bit about how we might be able to find them. To start with, black holes are pretty both space and time bending and somewhat mind bending objects. But I think that in some ways they're actually pretty easy to understand the basics of. And so the place I'm going to start in explaining this is on Earth. So if we want to escape the Earth's gravity, we have to launch a rocket ship at something like 25,000 miles per hour. So that is the escape velocity of the Earth. And that is the speed that's needed to overcome the force of gravity on the Earth. And gravity happens because of how close you are to a bunch of other mass. And so if you can imagine you shrink down the Earth to a smaller size, the gravity on the surface of that smaller Earth will get stronger and stronger. And that means the velocity you need to leave that surface gets bigger and bigger. And so if you imagine you keep shrinking down the Earth until it's very, very dense and compact, like about the size of a peanut, at that point, you would get to get off the Earth, you'd actually have to be moving faster than the speed of light. And because that's impossible, no light can escape from the black hole. And so that's basically, the basics of what a black hole is. It's an object that's so dense that light can't escape. And because of the fact that we can't really see anything inside the black hole, the only thing that we can find out about black holes are the mass, how much stuff is in them, and their spin, how quickly they're spinning. And in today's talk, I'm really just going to be focusing on the mass of black holes and what we can learn about the masses of black holes. So to start with, we've discovered two types of black holes. The first are called stellar mass black holes, and we call them that because they have masses that are similar to the mass of our sun, a little bit bigger typically. And we actually know quite a bit about how we think these things are formed. And we think what happens is in a very massive star, as it reaches the end stages of its life, the central core of that star is incredibly dense and can no longer hold up the layers that are pressing down on it. And it gets compressed and potentially into a black hole. And then at the same time, a bunch of energy is released due to that compression, and the star blows up. Most of the star blows up as a supernova. And in that process, all of the heavy elements in the universe are formed. Things like iron and carbon and nitrogen and oxygen are released into the gas of the universe. And it's many of these supernova that have gone into, that happened before Earth could be made and people were made and all of that. So because these happen in stars, and we think they happen regularly in stars, it's likely that millions of these objects exist in our galaxy. But we've only detected a handful. And I'll talk a little bit more about detection later of how we do this. The second type of black holes that we see are called supermassive black holes. And you can guess that these are much more massive black holes. They have a lot more stuff in them. And I'm showing you an example of a black hole in the galaxy M87 on this slide. This is one of the biggest nearby galaxies to us. And it's always, for a long time, we've known it has these peculiar little jets. And we now know that those peculiar little jets are coming from stuff that is falling onto the black hole. So if gas falls onto the black hole, it releases a bunch of energy, and that energy can get manifest itself as these jets that are coming from the black hole. And if we now, just last year, we were able to, astronomers were able to combine observations from all over the Earth at radio wavelengths. They were able to get an incredibly high resolution image at the very center of this galaxy. And you can see here, this is just 100th of a light year at the center of this galaxy that is something like 50 million light years away. And with this incredible resolution, we could actually see the material right around the black hole and the shadow of the black hole itself. And so this is really the most direct evidence that we have of these supermassive black holes existing in the universe. But we do think they're ubiquitous in big galaxies. So we think that basically every big galaxy has a black hole at its center. And because they're so good at converting mass into energy, it turns out they play a really important role in the formation of galaxies and the stars in galaxies. They basically play a regulating role in how many stars form in galaxies. Okay, so the thing that we don't know about supermassive black holes is we don't know how they formed. And we know that we can detect black holes that are devouring up material out to a long ways, so very early on in the universe. And so we know that the process that formed these supermassive black holes must have happened early on in the universe, but we don't really know what that process was. And the simplest idea that we have is that the very first stars in the universe could actually grow to be a much larger size than the stars in our present day universe. And that might leave behind much more massive black holes. So some black holes that have masses 300 times the mass of the sun, say. At the same time, another possibility is that in the very early galaxies, at the centers of those very early galaxies, the gas was incredibly dense. And that may have enabled the direct collapse of gas into something like 10,000 to 100,000 times the mass of the sun black holes. So connected with this mystery is another mystery, which is that if we look at the number of black holes that we have found in the universe versus the mass of their black holes, so that's what I'm showing in this graph here, we see that we found some stellar mass black holes that have masses typically of a couple times the mass of the sun to about 100 times the mass of the sun. This little funny symbol here, M with the little circle with the dot in it, that's a solar mass symbol, meaning the mass of our sun. And then we've also detected these supermassive black holes over here, which are millions of times or more, up to billions of times the mass of our sun. The one in M87 is actually several billion solar masses. But you'll notice on this plot that there are no objects in the middle part of this plot, right? So the question that we have is, are there any intermediate mass black holes? Have we not found these objects because they don't exist? Or have we not found these objects because we're not looking in the right places or we haven't looked hard enough? And so that's the question that I'm really excited about. And it's really very directly connected to this question of supermassive black hole formation. So going back to these scenarios for supermassive black hole formation, if the very first stars in the universe created those would have been very common, and we would expect lots of intermediate mass black holes to exist. And some of those, just a small fraction of them, would grow to be these supermassive black holes. On the other hand, if this black hole formation only happens very rarely at the centers of the densest early galaxies, then we would expect there would be many fewer intermediate mass black holes. And maybe there would be a gap in the masses between the most massive stellar mass black hole and the least massive intermediate mass black hole. And so this is the question that I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about today how do we find these intermediate mass black holes? And so that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the talk on is how we could find these. And the first way, I'm going to go talk to you about 3 different ways that we can find intermediate mass black holes. And all 3 of them are really current and exciting parts of astronomy. The first one is called gravitational wave detection. So recently we built these interferometers, which measure very precisely the distances in 2 different directions on Earth. And what happens is if 2 black holes come really close together, the merging of those black holes causes distortion in space-time. It's like throwing a giant rock into a pond. And those distortions in space-time actually ripple outwards. And at some time later related to the distance, they'll come past us, right? And so if a binary black hole merges in a distant galaxy, millions of light years later, we will detect it with our gravitational wave detectors. And the very first one of these detections happened just 5 years ago and was related to 2 very massive stellar mass black holes in the final phases of merging together. And that's what's shown on this plot here. It's actually the relative distances in two different directions on Earth of these very precise distance measurements. And the difference is actually in these 3 kilometer long baselines is actually less than the nucleus of an atom. So these are incredibly high precision measurements of the positions of the distances in order to see these waves of space-time coming by us. And there's been an incredible growth in this, in the number of black holes that have been discovered. So in this kind of infograph, the purple points here are all of the black holes that we knew about before LIGO. They were detected, say, through binary interactions or through some other technique. But then the blue ones are all of the merging black holes. And you'll notice that there's kind of 2 objects and then an arrow to a more massive object. That's because we're finding only mergers where 2 black holes are merging together to form a bigger black hole. And you can see that there's one of these black holes that is well over 100 solar masses. It's something like 150 solar masses. And that was discovered just last year. So this is by far the most massive stellar mass type black hole that we know about. It's really pushing up into this intermediate mass regime. And I expect that as the years go forward, we'll detect more of these. And there's plans to make a gravitational wave detector in space that will be very sensitive to intermediate mass black holes. So another thing that happens is, like the black hole in M87, sometimes gas or a star will fall onto a black hole. And we call that, in astronomy, we call that process black hole accretion. And the black hole accretion, typically when gas falls on, it'll form this kind of very, very hot disk of gas. And that is visible at all wavelengths, typically from radio to X-ray wavelengths. And is very, very energetic. And because of that, we can observe this sort of black hole accretion over large distances. And our best actual intermediate mass black hole candidate that we have so far has actually come from this technique, looking at X-rays around nearby galaxies. So what the image on the right here is showing is a source that's called hyperluminous X-ray source 1. And this very bright X-ray source we think is an intermediate mass black hole of about 10,000 solar masses that has maybe recently gobbled up part of a star. And so for looking forward into this, and this is really the singular, it's like the most convincing intermediate mass black hole detection in that mass range. And it's really the only one that we know about so far. But luckily, there's a lot of new opportunities for finding these intermediate mass black holes through black hole accretion. And in particular, the James Webb Space Telescope, which was mentioned in the movie, is going to be very sensitive at infrared wavelengths. It's going to be like 100 times more sensitive than any previous telescope at infrared wavelengths. And there are emission lines that we think will only originate around intermediate mass black holes that we can hope to detect with this James Webb Space Telescope. That's launching in October. Another telescope that's just on the verge of coming online is the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile. And this is a ground-based telescope, which is going to take a picture of the night sky every 3 days, the entire night sky every 3 days at unprecedented depth. And so this is actually going to create a movie of our night sky. And through that movie, we will be able to find events where a previously invisible black hole has a star fall onto it and lights up. And both of these things are things I'm really excited about and hoping to get involved in as they move forward. So my work so far has actually not been on those sorts of techniques, but on the direct dynamical detection of black holes. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned earlier, the stars, a black hole will make the material around it move very quickly because it's so massive. The strong gravity from the black hole will accelerate those stars. And a really great example of this is in this movie here, which shows the orbits of stars right at the center of our own Milky Way galaxy. So if you look there, as the stars are moving around this point, which shows this, which is shown as an open star, but in fact, there's almost nothing there. There's just a very faint radio source detected at that location. But we can see from the orbits of these stars, and in particular from this one yellow orbit that you see here, which has completed more than one cycle in these observations that span 20 years. We can tell just from the orbit how much mass is inside that orbit. And that number is something like 4 million times the mass of the sun. So this is the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. And this is actually, if you were paying attention recently, you may have noticed that this work won the Nobel Prize in physics this year. So unfortunately, beyond the Milky Way, we don't have the ability to look at individual stars. We can just look at the collective light of lots of stars together. And so in general, the way that we detect black holes beyond the Milky Way dynamically is that we take very high resolution images. And in particular, I use images from the Hubble Space Telescope to look at what the stellar mass profile at the center of the galaxy is. And then we use that to create a dynamical model and predict how fast the stars are moving around in that galaxy. And then we take observations of how fast those stars are moving around at the center of the galaxy. And that's what's shown on the right-hand side here. This is a map of the same galaxy, the central regions of that galaxy. And the color tells us how quickly are the stars moving around. And the faster the stars are moving around, the more mass we need in that galaxy. So we can then test based on the stellar light, can that explain the motions of the stars just by itself? Or do we need an additional black hole in order to explain the motions of the stars? And so I've been working with my group on this for the last decade or so. And we've been really trying to look at the place where we think the lowest mass black holes should be found in galaxies. And that is in lower mass galaxies. So by looking at the nearest kind of lower mass galaxies, things that are much less massive than the Milky Way, say 50 times less massive than the Milky Way, we are hunting for these intermediate mass black holes. And what we have found in several of them, black holes below 1 million solar masses. These are the first dynamical detections. And this is work that was done by my graduate student, Yu Nguyen, who you can see up here is receiving his PhD, and my postdoc, Mark Den Broek. And these pictures down here are all the galaxies that we've detected black holes in. So in the process of doing this, we also had a surprise. And this is related to the fact that when the galaxies form by the mergers of many small galaxies. So a big galaxy is formed from the merger of many small galaxies. And in this movie, you can see what a merger like that might look like. So this is a simulation placed on top of an image of a galaxy, of a very massive galaxy. And there's the red and yellow points are a smaller galaxy that's falling into that galaxy. And what you can see is that the gravitational force of the bigger galaxy rips away all the stars, except for the ones right at the very center, which are really dense and are resistant to being ripped away by the bigger galaxy. And so what's going to get left behind will look like a big cluster of stars, and that's what we think we found here. So this object that we've just zoomed in on is what we call an ultra compact dwarf, and it's essentially a giant globular cluster. And we found a really big black hole, a 20 million solar mass black hole, so 5 times the mass of the Milky Way. So this is the one that I was talking about in the video. And it turns out that we found black holes in several other ones, but we haven't yet found intermediate mass black holes in these objects, even though we think this should be a good place to look for intermediate mass black holes. And that is until now. So we haven't yet submitted this work. So this is that's why I say not yet hot off the press. We haven't yet submitted it, but my student Renuka Pachetti, who just graduated from the U with her PhD this past summer, has found a 100,000 solar mass black hole in a star cluster, probably a stripped nucleus of a galaxy around the Andromeda galaxy, our nearest neighbor. And you can see the observations that we have here. This is a Hubble Space Telescope image, and these are the velocity map and the speed of stars moving around within that object. And it's this red section at the center here, which indicates that there is a black hole in this object. Okay, so to conclude, I'm going to go back to this plot where I showed you the number of black holes that we found versus their mass. And what you can see is that we're starting to pinch in from, the work that my group has been doing is pinching in from this high mass end to find the lowest mass central black holes. And then the work that LIGO is doing is finding the most massive stellar mass black holes. And hopefully we'll have a better census of, with all the new facilities that are coming online, of whether intermediate mass black holes are common or not in our universe. So I think that's all I have. And now we can stop for questions.
Thank you, Anil. That was really inspiring. It was a fantastic video and talk. And I think I speak for all of us watching when we're very grateful for the outstanding presentation. One question that I had as I was kind of listening to your talk, it went by a little bit fast. And so I thought we could drill down a little bit on this now, is that under various regimes or various theories for how black holes are formed, you would expect more or less intermediate sized black holes. And so how are the findings of that you mentioned with Renuka at the end there, what implications do those have for theory of black hole formation? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I presented it kind of as an either or scenario, like, either we've had these black holes that are formed from the first stars, or we have these black holes that are formed at the cores of the first galaxies. It may be more like an and scenario. And what we're really trying to find out is how many, what is the dominant mechanism for forming the supermassive black holes. And so far from what we found, our findings really suggest that the black holes are more common than you'd expect from just the ones that formed at the centers of the early galaxies. So it really favors this kind of first stars scenario. But I think that we really need to keep pushing even a little to lower mass galaxies, lower mass black holes to really really nail that down. And yeah.
Yeah, neat. So another point that you touched on is these new telescopes and detectors that are coming online. So you talked about the James Webb space-based detection telescope. Now, my understanding from what you said is that is going to detect things in the IR spectrum. And then you had the Vera Rubin telescope, which is coming online, and that's visible. And then maybe the next generation LIGO experiments, they're going to be space-based. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you integrate all of these different detection regimes to advance some of the most sophisticated observations, the kinds of things that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of exciting things happening, and I think that the reason this question is so exciting is because it's approachable from so many new fronts right now. I think that typically, for getting time on these telescopes, the Vera Rubin Observatory is actually going to be, their data is going to be fully public for people in the U.S. So it's a U.S.-based project funded by the NSF and DOE. And so, I'm hoping that my group at Utah will be looking through LSST or the Vera Rubin Observatory data, and hunting for these kind of events where we expect a low mass black hole may have been hit by a star, where a star has been gobbled up by an intermediate mass black hole. The James Webb Space Telescope, you have to apply for time, and the first cycle applications are probably being reviewed as I speak right now, so I think the review panel is happening maybe this week, and I'm hoping that we'll get an opportunity to observe some known black holes to kind of get some sense of what we can learn from the observations. That's what my proposal is to do. And then that will allow us to kind of find things in other observations in the future.
Yeah. Very interesting. And we're getting a lot of great questions coming in from the audience. And I want to turn to one of those right now, because I think this is especially significant. It was asked by a 7-year-old named Lily. So Lily asked, does every galaxy have a black hole in the center? You talked about the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way. Do we know that every galaxy has a black hole in its center?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lily. Okay, so we do think that basically every big black galaxy, like a galaxy like the Milky Way, has a black hole at its center. And that's because we've been able to dynamically search for black holes in all of the nearby galaxies, and we find them very commonly. The other thing is that we can see when black holes eat up material, we see those out to really large distances, and there's a very large population of those objects, and we can tell that that most galaxies have black holes at their centers from the combination of those two observations. But at lower mass galaxies, so there's actually more, as you get to smaller galaxies, there's more and more of them. So and we don't really actually have a good idea of how common low mass black holes are in low mass galaxies. And so that's because they become harder to detect. And so that makes the observations more challenging, and that's why we don't really have a good census yet. And so, that's the short answer is we know down to about 1/10 of maybe the mass of the Milky Way. We think basically every galaxy has a supermassive black hole at its center. Below that, we just don't know yet.
All right. Well, maybe Lily will help discover that, make more discoveries in that direction someday. Okay, so I'm going to turn to another collection of questions to sort of synthesize a few that have come in from the audience here. There's black holes by their very nature are hard to detect, and you're talking about all these extremely sophisticated and very clever ways to detect something that doesn't emit any light, and sucks things into it. So that sort of begs the question that are there nearby black holes that we simply don't know about because they're so hard to find? And one person asked, are we going to be sucked into one? Is that a risk for humanity? Another question is sort of about the space distribution of black holes. Are there any sort of predictions about, we've been hearing a lot about recently, it's very exciting, sending the Mars rover. That's something that we could actually reach. Are black holes reachable? Could we send a probe to, or are they just are the closest ones predicted to be just too far away to ever do anything as direct as that? So maybe you could speak to that synthesis of questions there.
Okay, cool. This is great. So there should be a lot of black holes in our galaxy that we haven't detected yet. Like I said, there's probably millions, and we've only detected, you saw it on that slide, there's probably 20 or 30 that we've detected. So there's certainly black holes that are closer to us than any of the ones we know that we haven't yet detected. But there's many fewer black holes than there are stars in our galaxy. So we wouldn't really expect black holes to be any closer to us than the closest star. And the closest star, many of you probably know, is Alpha Centauri. It's about 4 light years away. And even that star is way, way, way too far for us to send a probe to, especially a manned probe to, but certainly a probe to easily. So right now, we have the fastest object in our universe is the man-made object is the Voyager 1 satellite. And at the speed it's moving, it would take something like 20,000 years or something like that to reach Alpha Centauri. So, we would have to get many orders of magnitude better at accelerating objects. And that takes a lot of energy, and it's really hard. And so from my standpoint, it's not really feasible that we'll ever have a direct probe of a black hole, because we probably have to send it, tens of light years away to find the nearest black hole.
Mm. Yeah, fascinating. That's a good rule of thumb.
And maybe I can talk about the safety, whether you should be worried or not.
Talk to that.
So you shouldn't be worried. And one reason is that black holes don't really suck things in. So because you can get so close to black hole, weird stuff can happen. But really, when you're far away from a black hole, they pull on you just like a star would. So our sun we're orbiting around it for forever and ever. We're just going to keep going around it for a long time, billions of years. And as long as a black hole didn't come inside our orbit with the sun, which is almost there's no way that that'll happen. We don't have to worry about the effect of the black hole on us. So you can rest easy. The pandemic hit you, the earthquake hit you last year, the windstorm, but black holes should not be on that list of concerns.
Right. It shouldn't be in your homeowner's insurance policy. Oh,
No,
okay, good.
not.
All right. Here's another great one that came in from the chat. And it's about, so I'll just read it. Does dark matter or dark energy have any impact on black hole detection and estimates of black hole size? So, and this may be related to another observation that we were talking about is on your distribution of masses of black holes. Of course, this talk was, you were focusing on the gap and then the gulf in the middle, but there's also sort of this this gap at the small end. The smallest black holes that you had on your mass distribution of black holes were a few solar masses. Are there smaller ones? And is that related to this dark matter question that came in the chat?
Yeah. So in general, we think that black holes there's probably some dark matter in black holes. We can't tell between regular matter, what astronomers call baryonic matter, and dark matter once it's in a black hole. Both of them will look the same to us. But we generally think that black holes should be made mostly of regular matter. And the reason why is because we don't think that dark matter can interact and lose energy enough to get super dense. So the part of how you get a black hole to be so dense is that you have the accretion disks that I showed, that picture of a pizza around the black hole. That is the process by which you get gas down into the black hole. And the only way that can happen is if the gas can cool off by, say, having some sort of transition in atomic energy levels and emitting light, or emitting light the way our sun's surface does through black body radiation. And we don't think dark matter can do any of that. It doesn't have any way of cooling down, so it can't get very, very dense. At the same time, one of the theories of there is a theory for what dark matter could be that involves the formation of black holes very, very early on in the universe, kind of in the epoch before we can see anything. And those black holes could have a range of masses and could basically form smaller black holes, things that are say a mass 1 times the mass of the sun or a 1/10 of the mass of the sun, and there could be a lot of those floating around. That would actually accommodate the dark matter. And there's some limits on that because we would expect occasionally one of those black holes to pass in front of a star. And when that would happen, the star would get a little bit brighter. And so from monitoring, they actually have monitored the center of our galaxy and a nearby galaxy and looked for objects passing in front of those stars. And they've been able to put limits on what those black holes could be. But those aren't, you still could have a whole bunch of sub-1 solar mass black holes floating around.
Fascinating. Yeah, I want to return to an image from one of your slides. And when you're talking about the supermassive black hole M87, I think, there's this really stunning image that I think many of us saw in the news about a year or so ago, feels about a year or so ago. And that was, kind of this black void in the middle of this sort of yellowish orange crescent. And that is an image of a black hole. And so can you tell us a little bit about that? Because what are we actually seeing? Can you walk us through what that image actually is?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is actually the light that we're seeing isn't actually coming from the black hole itself. It's coming from the stuff around it. So the right down to pretty close to the black hole, there's material orbiting around that black hole. And it's the light from that object, that from that innermost orbits of the black hole that we're seeing. But then at the same time, because the black hole is there, it ends up kind of casting a shadow in that light. So there's essentially a point where all the light behind the black hole is getting bent by the black hole itself. And that leaves this kind of donut shape in the images that we see. And so we can actually not only, I talked about how we can look at the mass of black holes, but we can also look at the spin of black holes. And it turns out that the image that we see can both constrain the spin and the mass and the orientation of the material that's around the black hole from that image. And so it's really the shadow that is the kind of most direct evidence that we have of the black hole. You wouldn't expect to see that in just a gas cloud that was emitting light without a black hole.
Yeah, so that raises, I'm kind of curious, throughout the talk and in this answer that you just gave, you talk about these predictions or, the light bending around a black hole, which must be the result of a combination of some serious theoretical calculations with general relativity and then some simulations. Do you work directly with the theoreticians, or what does that interface look like between, an observational astronomy, and a theoretician who's really studying general relativity?
Yeah. So I would say there's definitely a lot of those calculations that are done are coming out of a field called numerical relativity. So they're essentially simulating what things would look like in the kind of strong gravitational field influence. That is not something that I know a ton about. And so certainly if there's any part of my observations that touches with those things, I work with theorists on those topics. So on the work that I normally do, it turns out that the distances of the stars from the black hole that I'm working on are actually in the kind of normal, what we call Newtonian gravitational regime. They don't, general relativity doesn't matter. The space-time isn't weirdly bent or anything like that. And so we don't actually need the general relativity until you get to the very central regions where you talk about the very innermost material that's orbiting a black hole. And but there are observations and touch on that. And for instance, the James Webb Space Telescope observations I proposed for will probe those innermost scales. And so as part of my team of people on that project, there are people who are doing what we call magnetohydrodynamic simulations around black holes. So yeah, so astronomy is a really collaborative field. So typical papers have a dozen authors, and that happens. And we have lots of surveys where there's hundreds of people involved, including the Sloan survey here that is kind of the data of which is headquartered here at the University of Utah, and the spokesperson of which is my colleague Gail. And so that collaboration means that we can specialize a little bit more, and we bring in people when we need expertise we don't have.
Yeah, it's neat. Well, I'm glad that theoreticians, are important too. Speaking as a theoretician myself, it's good to know. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about your work with dark skies. We talked about that a little. I talked about that a little bit in the introduction. And I know you've done all kinds of innovative things. You have a team of interns that have led lectures at Bryce National Park, for example. You're very much involved with the Dark Skies Minor. I think the U is the only institution in the world which has an academic program around dark skies, and that's very interdisciplinary, combines everything from astronomy and physics to city and metropolitan planning. So can you speak a little bit to your work and your passion for those kinds of outreach efforts and some of the things? I think our audience would like to know a lot about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned that I wasn't someone who spent, when I was a kid, I looked up at the night sky, but it wasn't what drove me into astronomy. It wasn't the thing that inspired me. But since moving to Utah has incredible dark skies, and especially in the southern half of the state. And I really was grabbed by after moving here 10 years ago, I went down to Bryce for actually the solar eclipse festival the year after I moved here, and I was just super amazed by both kind of the night skies and also how many people were enjoying them, and how great a way of reaching people the astronomy outreach can be in a dark sky place. And so because of that, I started this internship program through my NSF grant so we hire a couple college students each year from around the country to go to Bryce Canyon National Park and spend the summer there doing astronomy outreach. And it's a pretty unique internship. There's not a lot of outreach related opportunities for undergraduate students. And we've been doing that for 6 or 7 years now, and with the help of both NSF and a couple foundations, including the Eccles Foundation and the Sorensen Family Foundation. So that kind of has launched my interest in dark skies. You know, like I noticed, okay, we can do the same outreach here up in Salt Lake City, but it's definitely not the same environment, right? It says that you don't have the same impact. You can't see the same things. And so that's kind of what got me started. And then I found that there was this whole community of people here at the U that were interested in dark skies. And there was this effort a few years ago to start the minor in dark sky studies. That's been a really exciting new thing that we're helping get off the ground here. So our first group of dark sky minor folks just finished their capstone course last semester for the first time. And I've been helping with kind of teaching those courses and designing those courses a little bit. And I think it's a really awesome opportunity and kind of very unique to Utah. And some of our students who've been taking courses in that program are now, you know, working for the state parks, getting parks designated as dark sky places and trying to enhance the kind of offerings for the public to be able to experience dark skies in our state.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I like you, I wasn't much of a stargazer until I came to Utah. And I remember some of my first camping trips down in the southern part of the state. And, you know, after your eyes adjust and you start really seeing all this high definition that you've never seen before, it's really, it's inspiring in many ways. And it's great that you're using these outreach efforts to inspire people in the ways that you just described. There are a couple other possibly related questions that have come in on about, you know, you spoke to your work with undergraduate researchers. You've mentored many of them. You've talked about the capstone projects that you've been involved in the dark skies minor. Could you maybe pick out one or two projects that that undergraduates were involved in, whether it's non-physics and astronomy majors who are in the dark skies minor from another major, or really people who want to make careers as astronomers? Maybe you can speak to a couple interests. I'm sorry to. It's hard to. I'm sure you have a Rolodex of these that you're.
Well, the first one I'll just talk about is kind of research related, my own research related, which involves the picture right behind me, which is a picture, a part of the Andromeda galaxy. So right as I kind of arrived here, we were starting to get, we had 2 months of time on the Hubble Space Telescope to get these huge 400 and some images of the Andromeda galaxy, and we detected hundreds of millions of stars. And one of the really cool parts of that was looking for clusters of stars which are born together and live their lives together and can tell us something about the kind of formation and evolution of galaxies. And so we wanted to make a catalog of those clusters, but we had this vast, you know, it's something like a 45,000 by 100,000 pixel image to look through. And so what we did is we created a citizen science project where a bunch of people, maybe some of the people on this call, looked through images from that Hubble imaging. And then I had several undergrads who've been involved in analyzing the data that comes in from that citizen science project. So basically we just had everyone circle where they saw a star cluster on the images, and we had like 80 people do that on every single image. And because, you know, even if a couple of people weren't very good at doing that, it didn't matter, because in the end, the wisdom of the masses were able to kind of show us where those clusters were. And so that's one set of projects that I've had 4 undergrads working during my time here on that project. A cool project that I didn't lead, but I was part of was this a mechanical engineering set of students for their senior design project. They created last year a drone to make dark sky measurements, not just at the ground level, but as you go above a place. So looking at, you know, basically how dark does the sky get as you get above where the lights are.
And that's a pretty cool, cool project that resulted in our dark sky minor courses then being able to use those drones to make measurements. So students, basically one set of students designed those drones, and then another set of students then used them to make measurements of, for instance, in Helper, Utah, they went down there and right before the pandemic hit last year and made measurements down there of dark sky, of the skies there, and how they get darker as you go up. And so that's been really cool. That was a really cool project.
Yeah. Geez, I need to get more involved in some of these things. They sound so exciting. Let me ask you this, since you touched on it just in your last response here, is how has the pandemic impacted how astronomers such as yourself do research? And, are those lasting changes that are going to live beyond the pandemic, or are we going to get back to where we were? Or, you could even fold in how you think about training students as future astronomers, PhD astronomers, or undergraduates. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so the biggest impacts actually were kind of related to the telescopes, right? So all of our telescopes shut down for a while, and some of them are just reopening now. And so that's meant that there's been a kind of a drought of data. So there was a project that I had that was to look at the nearest, what we think is a stripped galaxy nucleus and get a bunch of spectroscopic observations there. And that was supposed to happen last year and it didn't, and it's going to happen this year instead. And then the other, the conferences are really different, right? We're a very collaborative field, and that means that conferences play a role not just in presenting our results, but also in forming kind of new collaborations and giving us a chance to meet people who are doing complementary work to us. And so that's been tough, I would say. I've been to several virtual conferences, and they're definitely not the same. I think that, to me, the worst part of it is that you kind of end up doing your same job. Like when you go to a conference, you go somewhere and everything else is, you get to drop everything else. You don't have to make dinner. You don't have to, go to meetings. But in the pandemic, that hasn't happened. And so you're trying to kind of juggle going to conferences at the same time as you're trying to do other things. And I think also especially this kind of ability to chat with people informally has really been lost. At the same time, there's some really good things about those conferences. They allow people to more people to interact with each other, to give talks, and they allow you to go without to go to a conference without spending a lot of money and wasting a lot of airplane fuel and stuff. So I think that there's been a lot of discussion about whether we're going to continue with some online conferences afterwards, after the pandemic's over. And so that's something I'm really interested in. I care a lot about climate change, and I think as scientists we have to alter our behaviors too. We can't to acknowledge that we can't just keep on doing the same things we've always done. In terms of student advising, I actually think that part of things has mostly worked pretty well because of tools like this, of Zoom, and we've been able to, I meet with my students pretty much as frequently as I did beforehand. There's definitely a little bit lost with students not being able to just drop in and ask me a quick question, but you can use Slack and things like that for that. So I feel like it's helped us build some infrastructure that might actually help us be better advisors maybe in the future. I think most of us didn't use Slack regularly, for instance. Now I do, things like that.
Well, I think that's a fantastic place to kind of wrap things up. We're coming up on the end of the hour. And yeah, as we look forward to what the future is going to look like in the post-pandemic era, I agree that I think some of these innovations that we've all come to enjoy in some ways are going to survive, but it's going to be great getting a little bit more back to normal too. So we're all looking forward to that. All right. Well, I want to thank you again, Anil. This was a really spectacular webinar. I learned so much. I know, and I speak for the audience when I say that as well. And very grateful to you for the time that you spent with us today. So thank you. And I want to say goodbye to our audience here.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody.